Welcome back. This is our second lecture on the Northern Renaissance, the Renaissance outside of Italy. We'll be looking at France and Spain. So artists to look out for include Peasant Brugel. His Return of the Hunters is a piece that has some resonance for us. In France, we'll be looking at the work of the court painters Fouquet and Clouet, and in Spain, we'll be looking at the work of actually born in Greece, but moves and does his primary work in the court of Spain. So something to be aware of, the area that we're looking at next is the Netherlands. And the Netherlands has kind of a complex history. Control at this point of the Duchy of Burgundy, but just so that you see a connection here, not that you have to know all of to understand everything that's going on here, but Burgundy eventually becomes part of the Austrian Empire, and then the marries a Spanish princess, and so the court of Spain then gains control of portions of what was. So eventually, this southern section of what we call the lowlands, this southern section of Flanders, closely allied to and remain under the control of the court of Spain for quite a long time. The northern section, the United Provinces, what we call Holland, one of our first Protestant cultures, but for the time being, we can think of them as being closely allied to the Catholic Church. Peter Brugel is the first artist we want to know here, and Brugel is the head of a family of artists. We'll meet his descendants next lecture, and our next unit rather. Peter Brugel the Elder is a painter very much in the tradition of Hieronymus Bosch, who we just talked about in the previous lecture, and you can see in this particular painting, Mad Meg, a very close relation of disturbing imagery that Hieronymus Bosch was best known for. So in this traditional image, the Flemish proverbs, what you see is a madwoman who is being kind of assaulted by these demons and skeletons. Really quite a terrifying image. Bruegel's painting here is on a moral parable as well. It is the fight between Carnival and Lent, and you can see the two figures in a comic Carnival riding a beer keg and carrying this skewered animal of some kind on a spit into battle, and here is a nun also seems to be forced to hold a javelin as well, being carried by the righteous. So we've got the pious people on one side, we have Carnival on the other side. So again, it definitely is a contrast between good and evil, and it does sort of remind the necessity of balance in our personal lives. Some of Bruegel's paintings really do the inequity between people who had wealth and power and those who didn't. His paintings of beggars are really, in some cases, terrific for us to look at when we think about homelessness and poverty. Those are not new phenomena of the 20th or 21st century. They have existed people. Bruegel's best known for these large vistas with small-ish figures kind of crammed throughout them, and we see in this case that he uses symbolism quite a lot. The bird traps, for instance, are a well-known symbol within the idea of baiting a soul. So they kind of represent, the trap kind of represents the devil, and the birds represent our soul. Peter Brugel, the elder, will have two sons who we'll know later. Peter Brugel the younger is sometimes nicknamed as Hell Brugel, his father's work, especially the more gruesome work. His better-known son, Jan Brugel, is sometimes called Jan the Elder or Velvet Brugel. He is a friend and collaborator of Peter Paul Rubens. We'll meet him a little bit later. Bruegel's piece to know for the test, and this is why he was given the nickname Peasant Brugel, because so many of his paintings did feature people of lower station. You can see here people trying to keep warm in the winter. You can see the hunters returning. They don't seem to have an of success on their hunt, but you can see them entering their village, and you can see people at work ice fishing, but also doing recreation on the frozen lake there. It is incredible how much detail is in this painting. The closer you get to it, the more there is really incredibly detailed, even down to the smallest figures. You can see facial expressions even on some of them. It's really remarkable. Bruegel's definitely well known for this piece, The Peasant Wedding, and you can see that the bride, again, is associated with the just look pretty pleased with herself. And you can see that he's emphasizing real human interactions, and this is not, a high-class affair. You can see everybody's kind of joining in together. Dogs are there, which is kind of refreshing. You can also see that the guests are helping to as well. She definitely looks like she's had a little bit of wine. Check out those cheeks. My personal favorite. So this is in a village. This is a village celebration of some kind. But I think you all have probably seen these guys in movies. Lives. These are the kind of bros having too many beers together. You can almost hear the conversation between the two of them. Yeah, dude, it's kind of funny when you look at that expression. Even though we think of some human activity very contemporary, very modern, you can see quite a few things happening here that you might see in actual day-to-day life. People are really getting here in the background. There's all kinds of little interactions that are happening. There's even a little bit of scandal going on here. It looks like she indoors. I wonder why. Again, there's a ton of things to look at and not enough time to do it, so feel free to come back to these slides as frequently as you need to. France. I just wanted to show you a little bit of kind of the history of the kings of France, because some of the painters that we're looking at will be serving during the reigns of the kings that you see on this slide, from Charles VII through Francis I. Is going to be the king during the time period that Da Vinci moves to Paris. So the in France definitely shares some similarities with what we've seen so far in Burgundy and in the Netherlands. Lots of detail, figures of the picture plane, and a lot of detail in the still life items. If you look really closely, you can almost read words in the text of the books, in this Annunciation section. You can even see text being written in these alcoves above the figures on either side. This level of a hallmark of early Renaissance works in the North. It's a little bit different from what we saw in Italy, for sure. Gruesomeness is also a little bit more common in the North. That brings us to one of our court painters we want to talk about, Jean Fouquet. And Fouquet is a painter who is probably best known to us for the piece that you see on this slide. These two pieces are meant to go together. The one to know for the test is the piece on the left. It's Etienne Chevalier and his patron saint, Saint Stephen. Saint Stephen was put to death by stoning, and so you see he's got a stone on the Bible that he's carrying. The companion piece to it is really rather odd. Intense blue and red, almost frightening angels surrounding a rather eroticized vision of Mary and Christ child. There is speculation that, in fact, the way that the woman is depicted, the way that Mary is depicted, is meant to make her look very much like the mistress of the King of France at the time. Now, we know from, I'm sure, from our pop culture things, that when it comes to royal families, the weddings are very often for political alliance, for expediency of expanding the borders of control between a ruling house, and they're not always marriages out of love. So it's not unusual in the French court for it to be fairly well known that the king's wife, the queen, that's a marriage for one reason, and he's allowed, usually fairly publicly known, that the king has mistresses to the side. So that's kind of an intriguing aspect of this painting. We can associate the colors of the angels with a couple of different ideas. Red, of course, we think of as blood and passion. We definitely think red being associated with the saints, especially saints being martyred, and you see again with the stone for Stephen how painful being stoned must have been, but it was associated with Mary's garments. So there's perhaps an explanation for why those angels are painted in such an odd way. This is another example of the character that you just saw. There's Echan Chevalier. Once again, he looks very much like he did in his portrait. This is an illuminated manuscript that was specifically for him. This is his personal book of hours, and it's very much in a French Northern Renaissance style. Fouquet also did paintings showing the burial of Etienne Chevalier, and Charles VII there is presented to us in the guise of one of the masks. Fascinating to think about associating the king with a biblical story, but there you see it's happening. So really this need for the ruling family to be tied together to the ruling religion is kind of something we've seen all the way back to ancient times. This is Fouquet's Pietà. Definitely need to take a look at the Palace of Fontainebleau. This is just outside of Paris. 34 miles, of course, would be quite a distance if you were on foot or on horseback. Not so much for us with cars today, but it's a residence that the French monarchs used all the way up until the time of Napoleon III. And during the Renaissance, the Fontainebleau Palace was decorated by the Italian mannerist who we met a while ago, Rosso Florentine, with the assistance of an Italian sculptor, Primatico, and they worked there for about 6 years, from 1533 to 1539. So there are lots of murals and other decorations that kind of glorify the royal family, but this became known as the Fountain style. There's one of Fiorentino's paintings, and that sort of shows you an influence here on the kind of work that he was doing for the French court. Primatico's designs in 3 dimensions echo the kind of sensuality and contorted figures that we associate with Italian mannerist style. Bizarre paintings, right? That's the royal elephant. So the Fontainebleau Castle or Palace is absolutely chock full of very sensual, erotic figures, most part mythological scenes. Scenes of love stories quite frequently are prominent. This area at the time that it was originally decorated would have been the apartments of a duchess, and so you can imagine that there's a certain level of sensuality to this court. So the Fontainebleau style really does have some kind of unusual elements. We start to see paintings address some kind of erotic overtones, and you can certainly see that in this piece. Paintings of mistresses to the king often were done in this kind of topless style, and it's not unusual to see even the mistress of the king bathing with other women. That's kind of intriguing in a strange way. I'm sure these are meant as an erotic image for opposed to really for the pleasure of the women themselves. But it does give us an interesting insight into what court life was like in France. This is the work of Jean Clouet on the left, his portrait of King Francis I. And you can see Francis is absolute dandy when it comes to his interest in fashion. You can see that he has not only got the detached sleeve and the undergarment being pulled through, pretty elaborate looping there as well, but notice how much attention has been played to making his shoulders wider and wider and wider. This is an aspect of kind of enhancing the masculinity of the king, and if that's not enough, the king is the model for this painting of John the Baptist. That's the same face by the same artist. There's no question who that is meant to be and who it is. These are portraits of Francis as a soldier, kind of funny. And Clouet's painting in the same kind of founder style that again picks up on this kind of relationship between the king and the women in his personal life. We do need to move on to Spain right quickly, and here we have how many artists crossed international boundaries. We've already met, of course, the Duke of Urbino. You see him here. Here are paintings by Spanish artists that are portraits of him. So he definitely commissioned work from artists outside of Italy, and why not? They're different style to what the artists of other cultures are doing. So of course this is still a very heavily Catholic culture, but notice that these sculptural the Christ figure are far more gruesome. The effects of the wounds of the torture leading up to the crucifixion are displayed in a way Italian artists really would not have done. El Greco is probably the most prominent of the Renaissance artists working in Spain, and he actually was born in Greece, trained briefly under Titian in Venice, but then settles in Spain and does the majority of his mature work there. Examples of his work in this lecture, but we'll kind of fast forward a little bit to give you a sense of what the works are all about. He did large-scale altarpieces, the most important panels of which really do show you that he is the Spanish equivalent of Italian Mannerists in terms of style. The way that the figure of the body of Christ removed from the cross has such that elegant S curve and the elongated. Absolutely part and parcel of what the Mannerist style is about. He does have a very northern approach in that the figures are very much pushed to the forefront of the picture plane. The pictures are just deeply, densely packed with figures. We definitely want to know this piece by El Greco, The Burial of Count Orgon, probably his most famous piece. It depicts a 14th century nobleman who is being placed into his grave by St. Augustine, who had miraculously appeared at his funeral. The figure toward the front that's pointing the way into the scene is most likely El Greco's own son, and he's got a little label or piece of paper in his pocket on which you can read El Greco made me. He's literally written his signature into the painting, and I suppose there's a double meaning there, right, because El Greco is his dad as well. When you look at the figure of the dead body, you can really see a difference between the count and between the saints that are lowering him into the grave. And there you can see the paper with the El Greco made me signature. You can see other examples of art within art. You can see images that are very much in El Greco style on the garments of the saints. And clearly the way that the figure of John the Baptist is painted shows that intense elongation of form, and the contorted bodies of the angels very much Mannerist style. It's also interesting that El Greco gives us one of the few examples I can show you of a pure landscape. It's really unusual to see a landscape for its own sake without there being a religious story or even a mythological story attached to it. Very few of these types of paintings exist in the Renaissance overall.